Now, that was really impressive. I'm really glad to see that the UC campuses and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, our implementation partners, were able to send us these virtual tours. It's really interesting to find out what kind of capabilities are available at each campus. And to actually see it is really nice that we can travel around the state virtually to the various campuses and see what types of equipment and what types of capabilities are existing under this broad umbrella of facilities available under the Cal Test Bed voucher program. Um, so next, I would like to invite Socorro Green. She is from the University of California Office of the President. She will be moderating our next panel entitled Clean Energy Commercialization. What do entrepreneurs need to be most successful? And so I would like to, hi Socorro, so nice to see you. I would like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
Okay.
And provide some framing remarks for the panel. And then if you could introduce the panelists when you're finished with that, we'd really appreciate it. And I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your participation.
Oh, thank you. And good morning and welcome to everyone who's here today. So as Tinley mentioned, I'm Socorro Green with Strategic Programs Manager with Innovation, Transfer, and Entrepreneurship at the UC Office of the President. I just want to thank you, Tinley, as well as the National Cal Test Bed Symposium for their partnership and including UCOP in the annual convening. So the role of ITE at UCOP is to promote the research, ideas, and startups with the technology and know-how to improve our lives and promote prosperity and upward mobility in line with our public service mission as the University of California. The newly created ITE in Research and Innovation leads the system in moving groundbreaking research into the marketplace through knowledge transfer, research commercialization, forging alliances across public, private, investor, and philanthropic sectors, and nurturing our micro ecosystems across the UC. There are more than 60 incubators and accelerators across our 10 campuses, in addition to dozens of entrepreneurship programs and competitions that introduce students to entrepreneurship and engage faculty, staff, postdocs, and researchers and alumni into the startup and innovation ecosystem. There are also innovation hubs across the state that support entrepreneurs in local communities and around the world in their I&E endeavors. Our vast UC system also includes 5 medical centers, 3 national labs, 4 California statewide institutes for science and innovation, which recently celebrated 20 years, and an agriculture and natural resources division. The success of Cal Test Bed is rooted not only in their commitment to clean energy and their world-class facilities and staff, but their ability to identify the cutting-edge technology and startups and provide a wraparound value to them with operational support and funding opportunities. As the nation's largest clean energy testbed system and with global partners, Cal Testbed is a model for solving our most pressing challenges in climate change, renewable energy, and sustainability. UC is proud to be part of this network and with Cal Testbed at the forefront of tackling these challenges through education, research, and innovation. So today, as Tinley mentioned, we're going to discuss how entrepreneurs in clean energy can be supported at every stage of their journey with the focus on bridging the gaps as they move from inspiration to innovation to commercialization. We'll discuss the unique challenges of different technology and the tools and resources that can ease their journeys. On today's panel, we have several technology types represented: building technology, materials, energy efficiency, and Internet of Things. We'll discuss their unique experiences and opportunities and the ideal pathways for commercialization. So I'm delighted to be joined by 3 experts in the panel: Jennifer Worrell, Community Energy Labs, Tim Barrett of Gridware, and David Mechanic of Anthro Energy. So we'll begin by inviting each panelist to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their role, starting with Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Worrell, and I'm the CTO at Community Energy Labs, We enable buildings to use energy when clean sources of power are available and to lower energy costs by making smart decisions about when and how energy is used. Right now, we're primarily working with communities and schools whose buildings make up nearly 30% of the commercial floor space in the US. We recently held a series of user experience workshops with schools. You can actually see a screenshot of that in our lower right corner here. We wanted to understand their challenges with how they balance comfort with their energy costs. Schools have to really focus on comfort in a way that a lot of other types of buildings do not, because just turning off resources during an energy event is not an option for this type of vulnerable population. So we learned that for their HVAC controls, for example, most of them just have set points on their thermostats. Maybe they've even set up some schedules. The most advanced might even have a building automation system that has some simplistic rule-based controls. And by that, I mean, they may have some sensors that help to tell when the building is occupied and when it's not, and they may operate things slightly differently in either situation. But these kind of schools, they don't have the kinds of advanced controls that a lot of large commercial campuses have to help shape their load by staggering different loads, for example, or pre-cooling or preheating a building, for example. So we have software that combines some of these cutting edge control algorithms and energy models to give these schools and other municipal buildings the same opportunity as large commercial campuses to save money and the planet. And we combine that with an intuitive user interface that doesn't require a PhD in mechanical engineering to understand. So we make it easy for everyone, even cash-strapped schools with overworked building operators. We just got started on a project with CalTestBed to instrument and help with measurement and verification on several schools in California, specifically on a smart HVAC control algorithm in conjunction with an LVNL CRADA. CalTestBed is going to help make sure that we're really meeting our goal to lower energy bills while maintaining occupancy comfort so that we can help firm up the bill of materials for each installation, which for us is a key step in our commercialization efforts. And as you can see here, our next steps towards commercialization are really more sites for pilots and demonstrations. So currently we're working with more than 10 school districts in California and the Pacific Northwest. We'd like to continue to grow that number. So if you know of any school districts, send them our way. We're also hiring. Right now we're looking for data scientists, machine learning engineers, project managers, and enterprise sales folks who have a passion for clean energy. If you know these people, send them our way. And then finally, just building a great company with a culture that people are proud and excited to work for. I'm excited to join the panel today. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is David Mechanic. I'm the founder and CEO of Anthro Energy. At Anthro Energy, we're changing the shape of energy storage. We've developed an advanced polymer electrolyte for lithium-ion batteries that has unprecedented combination of toughness, ionic conductivity, and safety. We combine this polymer electrolyte with an advanced manufacturing approach and other high-performance cell components to create next-generation lithium-ion batteries that can serve a wide range of applications. The first thing we're doing with this unique material is creating batteries that are flexible, deformable, and otherwise structural. On the right, you can see some examples of products we can make using these flexible batteries, such as an integrated flexible solar storage module. And you can also see examples of the safety of our batteries where we can cut them and puncture them and they still are able to operate. There's a wide range of applications for these materials. We're starting out by targeting applications in things such as flexible electronics, wearables, in defense applications, as well as medical devices. We ultimately aim to use this advanced, safe battery technology to target more conventional applications involving electric mobility and other large-scale applications that require high-performance, safe battery cells. Our journey so far has involved developing this technology during my PhD at Stanford University and spinning it out with support from groups like the Tomcat Innovation Center and the Activate Fellowship based in Cyclotron Road. We're currently operating with a small team down in San Jose working on technology development and proving out our material performance. Our next steps are to start to do pilot demonstrations integrating our high-performance, structural, and safe batteries in real-world applications. We are also interested in pursuing manufacturing scale-up and have identified several manufacturing partners that can create these cells at large scale. We're excited to join the CalTestBed program in order to really prove out the safety of these cells. We're looking forward to doing advanced safety and destruction testing methods, as well as getting external validation of the data that we can show high performance of these cells. Anyone who's interested in developing advanced materials for these cool structural batteries and beyond, I'm happy to talk to, and I also look forward to participating in the panel today. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Barrett. I'm CEO of Gridware, and we're building real-time health monitoring devices that permanently attach to utility poles to detect and predict when grid equipment will fail and lead to catastrophic wildfires. I'm a former line worker. I dropped out of high school when I was 15, climbing poles, stringing conductors. And then I returned back to school and studied electrical engineering and computer science, both my undergraduate and graduate degrees at UC Berkeley, and really realized the lack of academic research from a field perspective. And it always confused me that we had sensors on our wrists and in our pockets, and yet there was so little information about the situation and the integrity of the equipment out in the field. You know, when 1,000 or 2,000 customers go offline, dispatch gives us very little information. Go and fix it. So you'll start in the middle and you'll divide and conquer and use your eyes, hands, ears to figure out what's going wrong or what has gone wrong. And it made sense to me that we should start looking at this problem from a different perspective and leveraging all the advancements that have been made in sensing and communications architectures and processing to develop and put these sensors out there across the grid and provide the necessary situational awareness to help operators make prudent decisions about where they do maintenance and upgrades, especially with the huge infrastructure package that's coming and the year-on-year fires that we've been experiencing here in California. So we have just a couple pictures here. The top left and the bottom right are pictures of our devices installed on actual utility poles out in the field. And the bottom left is at our testing facility that we constructed and our bucket truck that we own, and we get to destroy this testing facility on a weekly basis and then figure out what the signals look like. So our next steps, we've had a lot of interest from the utilities, and we actually don't have a demand problem, we have a supply problem, and we have to be very selective now about the utilities that we partner with to have the most impact with the limited. So we're really excited to work with Cal Testbed in a project that will help us validate and move that one step closer to certification. We're planning on deploying 350 devices within the next year. We just need to really understand what is the lowest hanging fruit for the decision makers at the utility, and most importantly, figure out how to scale up. So I'm really excited to be here and hopefully share some insights about how we can move towards commercialization more effectively. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that, Jennifer, David, and Tim. And Tim, actually, I think you've opened us up to the beginning of our first question, thinking about what are the main challenges the entrepreneurs face as they move toward commercialization?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to go first.
Yes,
it's I think as entrepreneurs in this industry, it's very challenging because when we set out on this journey, we get handed a playbook, right? Go out and speak to customers, ask them what their pain points are. And that works if you're doing consumer technology, or you can approach people out in the street or at a train station. But when you're working with utilities, and I'm going to speak through the lens of utilities because that's all I know. I know that clean energy covers a lot, but for utilities, that's difficult to get that face time with the decision makers. And when you do, they get beaten to death by the incumbent vendors. What's your pain point? They don't want to get asked what their pain point is. They want you to do the work to understand what the problem is first. And so that's a challenge, because how do you get it right? You got to take some guesses. You got to get it right, and you got to do validation efforts with very little interactions with the customers. So then when you get to the commercialization stage, you still are not entirely sure that you're solving the lowest hanging fruit or the pain point. And I think, yeah, that's been the biggest challenge, is because until we get immense amounts of validation, we have to build our whole own testing facility. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to build a testing facility that is unique to us and meets the needs to validate the technology before utilities are even willing to talk to us. What if we were wrong? Fortunately, we were right. So this is a big challenge that I think utility startups at least face.
You're nodding, Jennifer. Would you have something to add to that?
Well, from the software perspective of our side, we've had actually kind of the opposite experience, where we've gotten to talk to a lot of different facility managers and energy managers for schools. And so we were able to conduct a lot of interviews to be able to understand what their pain points are. And really, I think there's also a problem of a challenge of having some specificity into your software of, when you're in the early phases, there's a lot of different pain points. You can address them in a lot of different ways. And so you start customizing your product and you're trying to solve these problems. You're like, this is my core. And then when you're trying to commercialize and you start talking to, tens and 20 and hundreds of customers, you can't keep doing that. And so it's really about, for a lot of, in the software side, it's about really narrowing that focus. And so that's why we've been so totally focused on schools, so that we can really narrow down to their pain points, reduce the amount of customization. And part of that is so that we can work with people like Cal Testbed to do measurement and verification on a final software product that is, that isn't just a one-off of for every single school that we do. And so, but I do think that's a challenge for software-based companies, is that need in the early days to really pin down exactly what it is that you're trying to solve, and making sure you're solving that well, and not falling into the trap of trying to create a customization for every customer that's out there, because software companies really can do that.
And I certainly want you to chime in, David, but Jennifer, can you say, do you think that applies to, the broader customer base? I mean, is there a way to prioritize, or you're saying you just get the focus as you move through commercialization, as you're building the partnerships, as you're gaining momentum?
Right. I think that during these early phases, during pilots and demonstration, that's a great time to be doing those customizations and finding out how many of those stick to these early customers. But then as you're trying to scale up, having a really, continuing to understand your customer, and understanding the next pain point and the next pain point, so that you can prioritize the biggest group. I'm going to help solve a problem for 200 users instead of this one school over here. I think that's really what it comes down to, is getting to the point where you can group the problem and really solve it for more than these onesie twosie schools.
David?
Yeah.
What do you think in terms of the main challenges for entrepreneurs in your space?
Yeah, I think for advanced material technologies like what we're working on at Anthro, there's really a problem with scale. And so there's kind of an issue of being able to hit a specific price point of the product that you're making for a customer to be interested, and then reaching sufficient scale to kind of create that product, because things are really expensive when you're doing them at small scale, trying to manufacture them. And so that kind of creates a issue where you might not be able to go to market quickly with something that's really good, because you're not going to be able to hit a key metric, which is price, for basically any application involving materials. And so that makes it really important to kind of identify early supporters and early pilot partners that will be willing to pay more, be willing to be patient with the technology while it's growing. And those opportunities are quite hard to find, where you can kind of sell a product that's not quite finished or might not meet all the specifications or the price points, but you have to have that demonstration in order to get the resources to scale. And so I think that's really the barrier, is identifying who's going to take a risk on your technology, who's going to need it badly enough that they're willing to do something, even though it might be high risk or small scale or expensive or whatever, before you can get the technology to the point where you can even have conversations with the end users, because you have enough scale to meet their needs.
Well, can you talk about that in terms of your own journey, how you address these challenges, and then also what advice you'd give to others who are on a similar path and in your work, in your line of work?
Yeah, definitely. I think, Anthro Energy is not the only or first company to be working on kind of a safe, high robust polymer electrolyte material. I think what we have is unique and has a lot of advantages. But one strategy we've taken is kind of pursuing this niche market of kind of on-skin medical devices or other kind of flexible electronics applications that our technology is uniquely suited to address. And so by going after this niche market where people are willing to pay a lot more for batteries and people are willing to kind of potentially take a risk on this technology because it can create huge improvements in their device, I think it'll allow us to demonstrate this technology, prove out its safety, prove out its performance, and then ultimately go after the larger applications. So that's the strategy we've taken. I think it's a reasonable one, and we'll see how it goes.
Just a quick follow-up. Do you think that is because it's a niche market that you're in? Or do you, what are your thoughts on that as part of that strategy to commercialize?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just about identifying the application where, there's the lowest barriers to entry and there's a high demand for the product and it's not too far off the critical path of technology development. And so when we have conversations with kind of larger OEMs for consumer electronics, it's kind of like, hey, come back and talk to us when you can manufacture 1 million. But if we can find a niche application where, maybe we'll need to make 10,000 batteries or 50,000 batteries, that gives us an opportunity to do something different and to get our product out there, hopefully in a much quicker pace.
We'll move back because Jennifer, you started to mention some ways to address these challenges. Would you like to speak more to that?
I really, I feel like narrowing your focus down to a specific market focus, maybe two, but really having that that direct customer so that the personas of each of the people that you're talking to, and so that you can start to group things. I think that's really important. Holding those customer interviews before you start building things is important, but also continuing them and making sure that you're staying in touch with the customer. Do you like the things? Do you not like those? That's really important for them too. And in terms of commercialization of things, I think that the processes that you're using to talk to those customers are really important as well. And so I feel like as you're starting to scale and you're bringing on new people, not having having a product that having a product with a lot of customizations and a really that really narrow focus allows you to create some really solid processes so that you can have a really good customer service ethic. You really understand where your costs are coming from, because I think that in the early commercialization efforts, a lot of the costs as well come from doing customizations that you're not getting the bang for your buck out of, but also the processes around that of customer onboarding and sales and things like that. Understanding where your cost centers are, and so a lot of the ways you can mitigate that are really about logging the cost at a very low level, so that you can really understand as you're developing the product where to focus your energy to reduce the cost of those early products, which, like, as David said, the early products are the expensive ones. And so what can you do early on to understand where those costs are coming from and reduce them?
No, that's fantastic. And Tim, you named some really interesting structural challenges that you face, and then even just the nature of all the costs associated with it. So can you speak to how you think these challenges that you brought up can be mitigated and how you mitigated them in your specific circumstances?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that I mentioned was this is very challenging to do the validation effort of the idea. And the way that we mitigated that was getting venture capitalists on board with our initiative, really incentivizing them to give us a lot of money that we could deploy very quickly to validate our idea. And it's difficult when you are just surviving on grant money and it takes 6 to 8 months to get your first check. So we really focused down on understanding the problem, developing the team, building a mission that people were really excited about and want to come join and support, raising enough capital to go out and fulfill or create a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's how we kind of tackled that. But I also wanted to speak to Jennifer's point as well, where you have customers that require customization. And this process, at least for me, is foreign and new. It's my first experience working with these customers that have a laundry list of requirements just to begin talking about a contract. And what we did was bring in key players that have done this over and over and over again. They know how to navigate through all the red tape. They know the little tricks to sidestep certification or legal or procurement. They know how to conduct these project management milestones where you come in with the questionnaires, you develop that relationship, that regular conversation with your customers, because at least in our circumstance, we didn't have the opportunity to do that on the front end. And so it creates even greater pressure now on the back end to make sure we really understand the problem. So those are the two kind of main strategies that we've deployed.
Well, the other thing you know, oh, sorry, were you saying something? Was that you, Jennifer, or David? No. Well, something that you brought up, Tim, in terms of the financial support, I think that comes up no matter what sector you're in. And I know a lot of our entrepreneurs within UC, and we're regularly thinking as an ecosystem, what can we do to broker more of these relationships, to build these relationships, to make the introductions? So can you talk about what the dream scenario for you would be as an entrepreneur for the financial support? Because I think that is a key component at every stage of commercialization, really. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. In this, people are opposed to change. They got something to do. They come to work. They got to get their job done. With utilities, it's keeping the lights on, depending on whatever industry, and they got to do so. You are a startup, and you're disrupting things, and that's difficult. And so, what I see a lack of, or an opportunity for, is more resources that are within the utility that don't have operational objectives, that are just thinking about innovation alone, and can provide and understand how to get innovation through a utility, coupled, very tightly coupled with investors, so that they can very quickly validate that there's a market and a problem and a need to fill. And then if you have that coupling or those resources there, then I think that we can move a lot faster. So I think from a grant funding perspective, money should be also channeled into smaller utilities that don't have the resources, or not just utilities, but organizations that don't have the resources to take a bet or go out of their normal daily duties to help facilitate the innovation. So whether that's in the form of bringing in innovation managers within these organizations and having them subsidized, if not fully paid for, by state or federal funding, and then having a very tight loop communication with investors, and bringing that ecosystem to the next level.
Investors is a broad term, right? Because the question is, what's the role for investors? What's the role for VCs? What's the role for Cal Test Bed public funding? Jennifer and David, do you have thoughts on any of those things, the type of investors, as well as your dream scenario for financial support?
Sure, I'll go next. In terms of our dream scenario, is really been the freedom to innovate and iterate without the financial pressures of having to get that product to market and start scaling now, And so I think that comes a lot with the VC world, when you take VC money too early, that you've got that got to get it out there. And I do think it's important to get a product into customers' hands. They're the ones who are going to tell you that this is exactly what I wanted. And until it's in their hands and you're actually testing it, you don't really understand how your product impacts their world. And so you have to get it out there. But I feel like in almost every scenario, even if you have a fantastic idea, there's almost always an A/B scenario of how you might implement it, or different algorithms, or different, there's different pathways. And that may be in multiple areas of your application. There may be multiple bills of materials. There may be different ways of packaging the cost of goods. And the ability to be able to take in things like public funding, SBIR grants, CRADAs, and Cal Test Bed, and all of these sorts of public funding sources where you're given that freedom to really experiment with real live customers, I think is invaluable. And so I think that and we've actually been able to live that dream a little bit here. So that it's been great of being able to bring in some of this non-dilutive funding early on to be able to do these experiments, and then save the VC funding and such for the scaling, where it starts to become important for things like growing your team, because in a lot of cases, before you need people, you have to have people ready to go. And so that's the kind of place where VC can really help that scale, those scaling opportunities. And I think that to me, that's a better place to start introducing that sort of capital. But I think that may also be specific to our type of business as well. So.
Yeah, and I guess I would say a lot of similar things. I think for science, deep technology, things where we're kind of relying on material innovations, it takes time and it takes money, and so having that freedom without the pressure to commercialize is important. I think in terms of grants and government funding, I mean, that's been really helpful for us. I think one of the problems, though, is that if we do something like a SBIR or some sort of grant money, then we're stuck to this one product development pipeline or this one technical goal or technical milestones that kind of become irrelevant. And that's something that I think every founder will experience, of like, hey, I told the NSF or the DOE or whatever that I'm going to hit these 3 milestones, but I actually found this new material that's much better and I don't want to work on that anymore. And certainly there's room for flexibility there, but that can be frustrating as well, because I think at the end of the day, you do want to be driving as fast as possible towards a product that works. And sometimes the logistics of these grants can slow things down. I think kind of a dream funding scenario that we've had the opportunity to participate in is this Activate Fellowship that's run also through Lawrence Berkeley Lab. And that's great because it gives a couple of years of funding and some pretty no strings attached that allow you to really explore and even totally change your business model around and totally change your technology. And so we've tried hard to identify opportunities like that and have been fortunate to identify a couple, and hopefully that'll allow us to get across the line to where we can, as Jennifer mentioned, raise venture money and scale and really kind of deploy the product that we've developed with the non-dilutive funding. But it's tricky to balance the constraints of non-dilutive funding with the rapid timeline that you want to pursue to commercialize.
No, that is so interesting and insightful. Something that came up in the course of your responses is about other incentives. So have you given thought to what incentives you think would drive innovation and allow you to bring technology to scale? Anyone?
I'll pipe in just a little bit. We've been working with Incubate Energy and EPRI is in conjunction with SCE on some work and in association with those user experience workshops that I mentioned earlier. And so I know that in our world, a lot of the incentives come from the cost that people incur on things. And so it's sort of, in a lot of ways, it's a negative incentive. But I think that the utilities would love to move towards things like dynamic rates or highly dynamic rates in terms of, instead of just time of use rates, for example. And so having that technology that allows them to be able to make that jump is great. And so when the utilities become involved and they're able to incentivize their customers by giving them better rate plans, by having the ability to do things, that helps to open the door to our technology, and I think that that's something that's on the way as battery technology improves, as software like ours improves, as a lot of these different technologies really enable a much more dynamic grid. And so having the incentives to the customers that really support that are a way of getting our technology out there, because there's a lot of it is older technology that just isn't capable of participating in those sorts of opportunities.
And any other incentives, and even thinking more broadly in terms of what the university could be doing, Cal Test Bed, the government more broadly, any other incentives to support this sort of commercialization and innovation? And if not, that's okay too.
I can maybe step in and answer here a little bit more. I think every single one of us has an incentive to innovate on the grid. because what I've observed over the last couple months is a weaponization of the fragility of our grid against migration to a clean energy future. The argument here is the grid can't handle solar and batteries and all of the innovation that we're doing, so let's not do it. And that's a terrible, terrible thing to be occurring. And so it's like a cyclical dependency, right? And I think that's incentive in itself. Every single person, whether you're an individual contributor, you're a government stakeholder, you work in the utility, should understand that we need to break out of this cyclical dependency, and we're doing everything that we can to improve the grid on every fundamental level or dimension.
Okay, thank you. David, did you have anything before we move on?
I guess at a higher level, it's hard to pin down a specific incentive for anyone to pursue an innovation or commercialization effort. I do think there's probably a lot more great innovations and a lot more products that have potential commercialization than there are, companies or startups or people pursuing them, just because it's hard, it takes time, and the risk is high. And so I think whatever programs the university can offer or innovation centers that might offer fellowships or things, similar to the grants we've talked about, to give people both, a way to de-risk the commercialization process where they don't have to kind of put their, personal finances at risk or something like that. I think that's helpful. And I think, also you can think about kind of programs like Y Combinator or these accelerator programs that, hopefully we could see more of that in the clean technology and the deep technology space. It gives people both a little bit of resources and a very rapid clock that gives people incentive to work really hard and work really quick and see if they can make a breakthrough. And then that will give them, conviction to either pursue things in more detail or not. So kind of like I-Core style programs and things like that, I think are great to help push people's incentives to be able to pursue these commercialization efforts without putting undue risk on them personally.
Yeah, I'll double down on that as well, because I think, David, you mentioned you went through Cyclotron Road. Is that correct?
That's right.
So I had the opportunity to go through Citrus Foundry at UC Berkeley. And this was really the catalyst where, I was undecided about how we go and do things. Citrus Foundry came through and said, hey, we're going to support you and take this idea and help you get CalSeed. And to me, that was the pivotal moment where it became from idea to something that we could actually do. And that's exactly what happened. We got CalSeed, now we've received Cal Testbed, and this is the kind of momentum that we needed to go out to VCs and convince them that, hey, this is a real problem and we're the team to solve it.
Really interesting, thank you. And just to step back to thinking about when it came to, came to your pilot and demonstration projects in, your experience, and then also what that means for entrepreneurs starting their journeys in clean tech. What was your experience, and what support do you think could make that initial, pilot demonstration stage easier to facilitate for new entrepreneurs?
I could also go here. I think the program that's set up here at Cal Testbed is phenomenal. I think that there's also an opportunity to expand the reach of the Cal Testbed to work with various other institutions or organizations that offer testing facilities, and maybe even open it up further to allow the companies to use those funds to develop their own testing equipment.
I'll also throw out some love to Cleantech San Diego. They've been a phenomenal resource for us, as well as I worked with them at a previous company as well. And they have so many partnerships with universities. They have partnerships with financial assistance, not financial assistance in terms of bringing in money as much as helping to firm up a financial plan that really makes sense. And so they've given us opportunities to do pilots, as well as connect with policy advisors, connect with folks to help firm up like I say, our financial plan. And so we have really received a lot of support from them. And I think they're a phenomenal resource for anyone in the San Diego and Southern California area.
And no pressure, David, but what about you? Do you have any advice or suggestions or any opportunities you think that should be available to make it easier for pilot and demonstration projects?
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to think about this. I mean, the battery industry is notoriously bad for doing kind of external validation and testing and things like that. And so it's something that I think about a lot. I think for, what we're doing, where we're going to sell to, electronics OEMs or electric vehicle manufacturers, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's just tough to see how, we could be supported in that way from any sort of public effort, because we're very much engaging with, private companies that have very strict bill of materials requirements and very high performance standards. I think things like Cal Testbed, and I think even things that could exist at the national level to provide proving grounds for technology would be really useful. And so I think a great example would be kind of the NREL solar cell testing, standard protocol that tracks the performance and give you external validation. And I think there's a wide range of energy storage technologies, energy conversion technologies, that having some sort of standard institution to test these things and validate things would be really incredible. I think it exists for a variety of industries. It's not something that I see a lot for batteries. And I think that, what we're doing at Cal Testbed, could be a model for that sort of thing with a variety of different energy storage technologies.
Yes, no, thank you very much. I mean, and thinking about that, the efforts that happen at Cal Testbed, which is, I think very unique, not only in California, but in that, thinking about clean energy. How do you think we can coordinate those efforts? So coordinating the efforts of Cal Testbed as well as universities, and not just the University of California system, but other systems as well, and investors. How can we coordinate those efforts to make sure that that sort of, that sort of infrastructure is there?
Yeah, it's interesting. Go ahead.
Go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, I think there are kind of a lot of different incentives to prove technology out. And so it's hard for any one organization to kind of take charge of it unless it's truly neutral or third party or whatever. But I think there's no question that even people within universities, even researchers, even professors want a mechanism to really see if their technology is up to snuff. Like, people do want that to be more clear, more transparent, and easier to evaluate. And this is true for technology, for things that are more of like products to, address pain points and alleviate concerns of a customer. It's a whole different beast as well. But I think that's kind of, I don't have anything specific, but I guess I just would say that I think if we could do that, find some way to organize the incentives and get everyone in on a transparent process to evaluate technology, that would be great for everyone.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because I was going to say something very similar. We also are in the wildfire space, and I think the biggest challenge that we've seen is because wildfire is such a high profile problem, most vendors have identified this as a growth opportunity, and they've put huge marketing budgets towards solutions that don't exist, but most likely will work. And they know how long the sales cycles are, and how as a small startup do you compete with these large vendors that the organizations trust already, and they know that the sales cycles is going to be long? I think your answer is the key, because if we can actually boil down into the technology, ask the difficult questions, connect the technical expertise with the decision makers, then the real true innovation will always come forward. And I think that lies in startups.
Thank you. And also thinking more broad about the future, because you mentioned that that's really interesting, what you're saying about the growth of mitigation. We have something within UC on that was very interesting. But looking forward, especially about the equitable COVID recovery, equity and inclusion in clean tech and environmental justice. How can we do that to make sure that going forward, it is more equitable, and just and inclusive, particularly for startups. And that is something that we're also looking at within UC. We stood up a D&I funding, but entrepreneurs, equity and inclusivity more broadly as we go forward, specifically in clean tech. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'll go first. We put a lot of effort into looking for of posting our job descriptions for specific roles, not just in the normal places, not just in the Stack Overflows and the LinkedIns of the world, but also in Slack channels and other in sub-organizations that really target women and people of color. I think it's really important to have, a diverse workforce, and as a woman-owned company, we actually are on the other side. We just brought on our first guy. He's our first element of diversity on our team, and so it's kind of exciting for us. And so anyway, but we make a special effort not just to use the normal channels, but to make sure that we're specifically reaching out to to beyond the normal standard of channels, so that we can make sure that we're looking at the best possible field of candidates. And sometimes we find that that people just get lost in the shuffle in these big systems like LinkedIn and stuff like that. And so really having that personal connection through smaller organizations and Slack really helps us to find some very qualified candidates that we may not have otherwise reached.
Yeah, I think there's two elements here. It's diversity and DEI within the organization, and then also DEI within the impact that you have in the small and large community. Within the organization, I think you can't sit there and make a mandate that for this role, we're going to hire and do a diversity hire. It's just not something that I'm willing to do. But what we can do is put in the required effort to do exactly what Jennifer said, which is expand the pipeline as far as you can, and go to places that people don't usually go. And this is kind of speaks to how innovation can occur as well. As engineers, we're always talking with engineers, and that's why real problems often don't get solved, because engineers are not putting themselves out of their comfort zone and talking to people that they may not usually talk to. And this holds true for hiring. But then also when you talk about DEI regarding to impact within the community, it's tough, because when you're trying to build a business, you go where the money is, and that's what we've seen happening. And I think to offset that, we need more government involvement, and this is why we're super excited about CalSeed and CalTestBed, because then we could go to the small utilities, like up in Redding or down in Imperial District, where 1 in 5 live below the poverty line, and we can say, hey, we've got a solution for you, and it's free, and then we provide that service to the ratepayers in those locations where they absolutely can't afford it because they've got 6 or 7 staff running the whole utility.
Yeah, I guess I'd echo Tim on kind of this categorization of within the organization and then externally as well. I think, there's no question that diversity wins in organizations. And so it's on us and startups to build diverse teams. That's going to help you do better. That's going to be better for the world. And there's a whole lot of great things that happen when you put a diverse team together. I think, in the same side of that coin, you got to put the effort in to make that happen. And I think that's not just true for startups, but that's true for people across all organizations. We need people that are energy technology, clean energy technology, grid technology is a big growth area. And so if we're looking for ways to bring people up and bring underrepresented groups into this community, it's a great time to do it. I think there's a lot of opportunity right now because there's tons of growth. And so I think it's something that's urgent. I think it's something that we think about every day. And I think it's something that, programs that promote that are helpful, not just for the individuals that are participating in them, but also the organizations that they'll ultimately go on to work for, build, create, et cetera. So I think, the more of that we can do, the more DEI initiatives, the more support of underrepresented or marginalized groups, the better.
Yes, thank you. And I think, something also really interesting was said in terms of expanding the networks and building these cross-sector partnerships, because it's not only diversity in terms of things we think about the usual suspect, but it is about the diversity of ideas and thinking about those disproportionately impacted by climate change and environmentalism. So thanks so much for that. So we wrapping up today? I was just going to encourage people to ask any Q&A questions.
If you want to field a couple of Q&A questions, that's also fine. If there's some questions from the audience, we'd welcome them.
Oh, there are none. I was going to ask people to ask them. So we don't have any in the Q&A, but if anyone has any questions, we encourage you to ask. But I do have a final question. I don't know if there's time, Tinley.
Time.
Okay. So
Yep.
just a final question in terms of what sectors do you think clean energy technologies or enabling technologies will have the greatest impact? And this is also thinking in line of our post-COVID recovery.
I'll be a little biased here, but
yes,
there's a lot of work in batteries to do and storage. There's a lot of work in management of electricity flow, generation, but there's so much work on distribution. And without a distribution network to connect all of these resources, all of that work is not going to be able to move forward. And this kind of goes back to what I said earlier about how the naysayers against the clean energy future, who are not incentivized for a clean energy future for some reasons, which I don't understand, are using this as a weapon. And we need to push back and push back hard.
I'll join the biased front. I think that the schools area is really a good place right now. And the reason for that is, you may not be aware of this, as students return to schools for COVID, a lot of these schools they've upgraded their equipment a lot to improve their air quality, but a lot of them leave their doors open and their windows open in a lot of cases for air circulation and things like that. And there's so many opportunities, and it's not just about taking advantage of this brand new equipment that may talk to with better building standards, as this conversation is going on in the chat I see over here. But there's also alongside of that, how do you mitigate, the doors being open? And so these systems that they have in place, they were not designed for this. And so I don't think that this is going away. I think that air quality will continue to be a really strong focus in areas like schools where we have that vulnerable population. And so I think that's a great place to be, whether it's for this or for other clean technology.
Did you have anything? No pressure.
I don't really have anything on this.
Okay.
No.
So there were just a couple questions in Q&A. Tinley, do we have time for those? Okay. So we'll start just for one for Jennifer, because it was specific to her. It says, you mentioned policy advisors being helpful to you. In what way, and how does your organization interact with policy?
That was at my previous company. We haven't actually spoken with, but this is the University of San Diego is one of the partners for the San Diego entrepreneur program through Cleantech San Diego. And so we worked with them in the past to really understand the policies that are coming down the pike and really get that broader view, because a lot of times you just read what's in the news, you may see, but having some dedicated reports about where things are going and what's sort of underway, both in California as well as the United States, can not just help you sort of target your product, but also even target investors and things like that to have a better understanding of where the world is moving. Because I think that really you can't just understand what's happening now. You have to understand what's happening down the road. And like I say, I don't think that's accessible in an easy way to entrepreneurs. And so having some of those connections to policy folks to give you those kinds of heads up are great. So, and Tanya's also been putting in extra information in the chat if you haven't been keeping up, but yeah, she's got some good stuff there as well.
Thank you for that. And it's like the final question, we're getting a little close. How do you folks see tech evolving with CCAs in California?
we had the opportunity to work with Silicon Valley Clean Energy recently, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity for innovation. I mean, that's the whole point of these guys, is to be able to do things differently, right? And so you don't have this giant machine that you're dealing with these investor-owned utilities. And so I consider that to be, a way of reaching a segment of customers that you may not have been able to reach if they were really still part of that investor-owned utility. And they're really incentivized to look for innovations, to validate that they need to be there. And so I think that the move towards CCAs is really a point of opportunity for a lot of early entrepreneurs.
Great, that's great. Anyone else, Tim or David? And Tinley, do you have time for the final one then? Because that went faster than I thought.
Sure, yeah, we can certainly answer the final question.
Okay, so how to facilitate the process and programs for the entrepreneurs should be like the way we build the house, which only take 1 year to do if it's with the funding, if the funding's available. I don't know if I quite understand that question. So how to facilitate the process and programs for the entrepreneurs? Oh, that seems like more of a comment. So maybe we'll do the question for David for David or anyone else who'd like to ask. Asking as someone on the government side, what are examples of government funding programs you think have been adequately flexible or well structured?
CalSeed, 100%. And now the Cal test bed as well. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, my favorite one is the Activate Fellowship. It's pretty unstructured, which is, I think, the best for entrepreneurs, as we've talked about. And then we also are working with a program through the Department of Defense called National Security Innovation Capital. That's phenomenal at letting us define our own milestones and working with us to scope those appropriately and adjust them as necessary. And I think those both have been great.
We've worked with a lot of awesome organizations along the way, and so we've been doing an SBIR that has given a lot of opportunity to do those experiments that I talked about earlier, as well as LBNL, and we're really, really excited about getting started with Cal Test Bed here in the upcoming weeks. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I was really glad to hear CalSeed and Cal Test Bed in there. That was really nice to hear. But it's really important to know that it takes a village to support clean energy entrepreneurs and to support the commercialization of these innovations. It takes the great minds of the innovators themselves and the initiative and the drive of them and their skills and abilities to develop their innovations. But then we need this kind of pipeline from early stage all the way through commercialization of government support, nonprofit support, venture capital. All of it needs to work together. So I just want to thank you, Socorro, for moderating a fantastic panel. I'm so glad to be partnered with you and your colleagues at the University of California. It's just terrific. And I want to thank Tim and Jennifer and David for being terrific panelists. So thank you very much. I think we'll close this panel and move on. Take care. Thank you so much. So moving on, and I'm really delighted that there was some discussion of some exemplary government programs and exemplary programs that help innovators so that are flexible and that they're able to adjust and pivot as the entrepreneurs are learning. The programs are able to pivot to move at the speed of innovation. And that's always been an issue for government and a lot of bureaucratic support for these types of efforts to support clean energy innovation. So government moving at the speed of innovation is something that is rare, but that is something that we're aspiring to. And we're really hoping that with Cal Test Bed, we're able to help our entrepreneurs as possible as they do their testing and prove their concepts and then move into pilot and demonstration projects, accelerate towards commercialization. So next, I would like to invite you all to join me for a virtual tour of UC Irvine.